A better name for this video would probably be how I use icons in 13th Age, because like many things in this wonderful, wonderful game, the rules are loose and probably play differently at every table, but I see a lot of discussions online about people getting a little frustrated with using icons and often playing 13th Age without them. Icons are such a core part of what makes this game what it is, and I want you to use them, and my heart hurts when you play 13th Age without them. So first, what are icons? Icons in 13th Age are basically the most powerful NPCs in the world. The movers and shakers, the emperor of the kingdom, the Lich King who is raising all the dead, the queen of the elves, that sort of thing. The icons that the core book gives you, the one that the core book suggests, are all made to fit high fantasy tropes that you might find in most fantasy stories. You can use them as is, you can rename them, you can reskin them, you can do whatever it is that fits your setting. If you're new to 13th Age, the default setting suggested by the core book does a pretty good job of using these icons. So I'd consider just using that if you're running a classic fantasy game. For my game, I used a bunch of the standard icons from the core book, I made a few up, and I stole a bunch of them from Cobalt Press, who have a really good 13th Age bestiary for their Midgard setting, and that book also has a lot of cool ideas for icons. And keep in mind that these icons don't really have to be individual NPCs. For example, one of the icons in my book, in my game, that I stole from the Midgard book, is a council that is basically the central political power in a region. When you use the icons in play, you're typically not going to use the individuals themselves, the NPCs themselves. You're going to use how they influence the world. So this could be through organizations and factions that are aligned and associated with these icons, like how the city guard might be associated with the emperor, or some order of wizards with the archmage, or even how a theme like the resurgent wilds is associated with the high druid. So now that we have a better idea of who the icons are, what do you do with them? Well, first, the players use them to help build their character's story. In character creation, players need to assign 3 icon points to represent their relationship with the icon. If your character was a celebrated politician or captain of the guard in the empire's capital, maybe that's a positive relationship with the emperor. If someone they loved was turned into an undead abomination and they vowed to break the magic that makes something like that possible, and in so doing making them a threat to necromancers everywhere, maybe that's a negative relationship with the Lich King if you're using that icon. These are just examples. Remember that backgrounds in 13th Age are not confined to a set list of skills. The backgrounds are meant to teach us something about your character. So a good way to do this is to first come up with your background and then think about what that tells you about the relationship that a character might have with an icon. If you decided, for example, to have a background like Assassin of the Obsidian Order, maybe that particular order of assassins does work for one of the icons or their organizations. I really like this because it makes character creation into this very fun, collaborative world building exercise. If nothing I just said about backgrounds made any sense to you, go watch my Why I Love 13th Age video that I made, and maybe the character creation video as well, but that one is like 45 minutes long. Okay, so you've created your character. Now, how do we use the icons actually in play? This is where the rules get pretty loose and a lot of people just ditch the icons altogether. The GM uses the icons to make prep easier and determine which factions might be active in any given session. And the players use the icons to make narrative declarations on stuff that have something to do with the icons. And for GMs out there, I encourage you to, be pretty loose with this. I have my players roll their icon dice at the end of every session, and I note what they rolled, and then I let that very generally guide me as I think about how things might be going in the game world. Personally, I never prep plots. I only prep situations, like this NPC wants to do that, or maybe something happened elsewhere in the world, or I maybe think it would be cool to have a place that looks like this, and the plot is basically generated based on what my players do. Mechanically, the way this works is that, for example, if a player puts 2 points with the archmage, archmage, or any other icon, doesn't matter if it's positive or negative, they will roll 2d6, 1 for each point. A 5 gives them an ambiguous advantage, and a 6 gives them a clear advantage. These are those icon dice that I ask them to roll at the end of the session. But first, let's talk about how the GM can actually use these. So for example, let's say that someone in the game was kidnapped, but we don't know who took them yet. But I see that 2 of my players rolled 5s and 6s with the archmage. Well, maybe the assassins of the Obsidian Order, who have been known to do the archmage's dirty work, took the victim. Trust me, it's going to lead to a lot of moments where the players will be like, oh, it's all connected, because it's always going to be stuff that they care about because it's all embedded in their stories. It's very cool. Am I doing a good job at convincing you it's cool? It will generate these stories that feel so interconnected because they're always driven by the icons that the players want it to be associated with. And also, I don't know if it's archmage or archmage. And of course, you're going to have lots of icons in play. You don't have to have a story thing happen in every session for every icon. Use it wherever it makes sense. For me, it's been helpful because it really helps shape which powers in the world are going to be prominent in this game. I think this would work even better if you encourage your players to share at least some icons. If you have 10 different icons and all your players have completely different ones, it might get a little tricky. As a player, you can use icons to make narrative declarations or even get some hard rewards. I think what tends to happen at a lot of tables is that everyone just assumes that it's always up to the GM to decide when icons come into play and offer the players some ways to use it. And players often come from D&D and kind of forget about the icons because 13th Age is basically a flavor of D&D. And all of that is reasonable. We always forget stuff in every system, and it's just a thing that you need to get used to. But I think it's a lot of fun when you do. So a few things about this and an example of how you can use your icon roles. Example 1, interactions with NPCs. You're talking to someone and you're trying to get information out of them. And this NPC is some old man who doesn't have the time of day for you, and you're getting a little stuck. This is the time to ask, hey, can I use my 5, which I rolled earlier, with the Emperor to maybe see if there's a connection there? And if your GM goes with it, which they should, maybe all of a sudden you spot a faded tattoo on their arm that tells you that this man served in the same unit in the guard as you. And suddenly you have an in with this person. Because you spent a 5 and not a 6, he's also going to need something from you. I've had whole storylines come into life this way exactly. Example 2, information. You're in a new city and you need to learn about where something is, or what's an easy way in and out of the city, or how do you get an audience with the council. Let's say that you have a 6 on your negative relationship with the Free Council, the group of corrupt bureaucrats who run this city. Because it's a negative point, the council is not going to help you out, but the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Maybe you spend that 6 to make a new contact in the resistance or something. You don't have to come up with these things on the spot. Just bring it up to the table. Hey, I got a 6 with this icon. How do you think I can use this here? Together, someone is going to have a cool idea. This does require the GM to be flexible and treat the game as a true collaborative storytelling exercise and not like a typical D&D game where only the GM decides things about the world. In 13th Age, the GM of course has final say about what happens, but should be loose. This is a loosey-goosey game. Generally, if it wasn't clear, the advice that I would give 13th Age GMs on icons is to be very loose with it. If the players have an idea on how to use the icon roles in a way that vaguely has something to do with their icon, 9 times out of 10, I'm gonna let them do it because cool stuff will happen. Example 3 is loot. If your GM is good with it, just straight up use that 6 that you rolled with an icon to find some magic item on a monster you just killed. As a GM, this is not as fun as the more narrative stuff, but it's a great thing to do when you know the session is going to end and you haven't used it. The good thing is that the Book of Loot, which is basically, the book of all the magic items, also organizes the magic items by icon. So it's pretty easy to pull something that sort of has something to do with the icon that you rolled. I will say that the book obviously uses the icons from the core book. And I'll also mention that if you don't get to use the icon rolls at all, that's fine. You don't have to use every mechanic of a game in every session. The book does give you other ways to use icon rolls, like rolling them when something significant happens in the fiction, but I haven't personally used that. So just to sum things up, when you're creating characters, icons help you flesh out the story and tie your character to the world. Then from session to session, they help the GM to figure out which factions are active, and they let the players do cool narrative things. I will agree that all of these definitions are very, very loose and leaves much to the players and the GM, which is why I like it a lot, but also why I think a lot of people don't end up using them, because the rules can be clear. There are plenty of games out there that use meta currencies that impact the narrative in a much more structured way, like Benny's and Savage Worlds, but in 13th Age's defense, that's the style of the whole game. Yes, it's a form of D&D. The bones of the game are D&D, with a layer of loosey goosey narrative stuff just put on top of it. Anyway, I like this game a lot. It's probably my favorite version of D&D or spin on D&D. If you play it, try icons or not, do what makes you happy and go play a fun game.